Hello and welcome to the Lebanese Politics Podcast. My name is Benjamin Red. I'm joined as always by Nizar Hassan. How's it going, Nizar?
I'm good. Good to have you back.
Thanks. I was gone for a very minor surgery. I think you put it like very, very kindly on on the podcast last week. You said I was resting, which almost sounded like I was dead. But no, I was just like sort of drugged out, recovering. But yeah, I'm back, ready to go. And by the way, last week's episode, I really enjoyed it, and I really am kind of angry that I missed Mona Harab. If you guys didn't, if you missed the episode last week that Nizar did with Mona Harab, go back and listen to it, because she's sort of like kind of a legend in this town. Like she's very well known. She has like this sterling resume of all this research and everything. And the episode was genuinely very, very fascinating about public spaces and politics of that. It was something that I even in my like somewhat drugged out state really enjoyed listening to last week.
I'm glad.
This week we've also got like a great episode for you guys. We're going to be talking about the South Lebanon Army later on, and what all went on with that, and especially with this latest thing that happened with this person who was associated with that army coming back to Lebanon and getting arrested. We're going to dive into that and explain exactly what all of this is about. But of course, first, we have to get to the news. And to start out with, we have two things related to the media that happened this week that are quite important. Number one, Future TV is suspended. It is no longer in operation. Now, we knew that they were having problems. This is Future TV. It's Saad Hariri's television station, like his mouthpiece, one of the major TV stations in the country. It has been, for financial reasons, suspended. They say they're going to, like, within a few months, they'll like reopen or something, but we don't know what that's going to look like or if that's going to happen. But this is really a huge deal. Future TV has been around since 1993. This is like, it was one of Papa Hariri's, Rafik Hariri's, like really big, movements into the media sphere, along with Mustaqbal, the newspaper. Now, Mustaqbal newspaper also shut down this year, shut down in January. So we're seeing sort of the end of the Hariri media empire. It's ending before our eyes.
Yeah.
Which is a major, major deal. And of course, this also has consequences for people on the ground. There's some 350 workers that are basically out of a job now. They weren't getting paid anyway. So, in
the last 2 years.
Which is insane, right?
That's fucking insane.
Yeah. And all the more insane because we know that Hariri, he has money. So why isn't he paying? Well, typically the way that owners do this kind of a thing is they draw a very strict line between what is their personal money and what is, a company's money. At least when times are rough, this is how the lines get drawn. When times are good, maybe not so much.
That's a good observation.
So yeah, really sad story for these 350 people who, weren't getting paid and they're now out of a job, basically. Also in media news, things aren't completely terrible on the media landscape. We do have a new newspaper, which started up, I think, a couple months ago, Nida al-Watan. But they are under attack for a headline that they had the week before last. It was like a front page headline, and it said something to the effect of "New ambassadors in Ba'abda, welcome to the Republic of Khamenei." Instead of "Welcome to Lebanon," right? And this headline, of course, like it was, it caused a lot of controversy and everything. But it caused so much controversy, though, that the editor-in-chief and the responsible director of the newspaper were called in this past week, for interrogation at the Justice Palace. And then later on in the week, on Friday, Beirut's district attorney, Ziad Abu Haidar, is sort of like, we've spoken about Ghadaun before on the program. He's the same job. He does the same job that Ghadaun does, but instead of for Mount Lebanon, he does it for Beirut, right? Mm-hmm. He filed a case against Nida al-Watan on Friday. And so this is important because, of course, this is just a continuation of basically the state putting the media in in its crosshairs and going after the media for things that they publish.
Yeah, and it's kind of, I think they expected this. I mean, the Nida al-Watan, it might be also part of their strategy of entering the market. It's a very controversial thing to say, but I feel like any newspaper to make headlines in Lebanon, for people to hear about it, needs to be controversial, needs to have some lawsuits.
Right. Also this week, the Special Tribunal for Lebanon indicted Salim Ayyash in the cases in several cases of attempted assassinations and assassinations. Salim Ayyash is one of the 4 people who are on trial for the murder of Hariri, and now they have linked him to the attempted assassination of Marwan Hamede in October 2004, the attempted assassination of Elias Mour in July 2005, and the actual assassination of George Hawi, the head of the Lebanese Communist Party, in June 2005. So this is going to be like, the STL isn't just about Rafiq Hariri and that assassination. It's also, any cases that they say are connected to that, they also can try. And so this is one of those cases that they're going to try. And apparently they are going to go after Ayyash. And they have also issued a call for victims, any members of the public who were harmed by these attacks, to come forward. And those victims have until December to come forward to the court to apply to give their testimony.
And for backgrounds, those who are interested can go to our episode on the STL specifically. I forgot the number of the episode, but you will find it.
Really quickly, Cabinet met a couple of times this week, on Tuesday and Wednesday. On Tuesday, they made some more appointments. So this basically added on to the previous week's appointments. The previous week, they appointed like a bunch of judicial people, like a new head of the Court of Cassation, a new head of the Shura Council, a new state prosecutor, basically a new attorney general. This week, they continued that and appointed a head of the Investment Development Authority of Lebanon, and some other officials with IDAL, also a new head of the Higher Council for Privatization. And once again, we saw people coming out who were unhappy with this. The Lebanese Forces was again unhappy with this. Samir Jaja, the head of the LF, came out and said that they didn't have any problem with the people who were actually appointed. They were actually, consider them like, oh, these are good picks. But Jaja said that the problem is with the process. And we don't have a proper vetting process and nomination process in place. And we need to have that. It doesn't matter if we happen to get lucky and get a couple of good guys this time. We need to have something that is systematically, gives us the best people available to fill these slots, which I, sympathize with. I think that's like a pretty good argument, honestly. In Cabinet's second session on Wednesday, they talked about the budget, the 2020 budget. Back to that again. It was their first budget session held for 2020. According to Wael Abu Faour, who is the industry minister, they approved 14 of 32 articles. So, most likely getting the pro forma stuff out of the way. And it looks like they're trying to get things done on time this year, which is a really big deal. The way things are supposed to happen is Cabinet is supposed to take it up and finish it by mid-October, and then they pass it off to Parliament, and then Parliament has till the end of the year to pass it, right? This has not been done. I'm not sure the last time actually that it was finished by the end of the year, but the last time that it was done within constitutional guidelines was 2003.
Wow.
The 2003 budget was signed on the 30th of January of 2003. And so it wasn't actually by the end of the year, but it was within, the Constitution has this clause that says, oh, you can go a month over, and there's a special procedure for this, extraordinary procedure for this. So the last time that we actually had a budget and did it by the Constitution, even using extraordinary measures in the Constitution, the last time that happened was 2003. So if they actually do that this year, that'll be pretty big. That'll be pretty amazing.
Noting, of course, that there were, 12 years, right, without a budget being passed?
Yeah, exactly. But this is also the thing, though, with that, because people talk about these, 12 years. Oh, we didn't have a budget for, from 2006 to 2016, there was no budget. But back before then, the 2005 budget, it wasn't the process went smoothly back then. No, the 2005 budget was passed over a year late. It was passed in February of 2006. So you have to go back even further to a point where the Lebanese politicians really had, things not together, but more together, you know.
It's good. We have some like traditions to maintain and protect.
So you're against passing the budget on time? Is that so that's the sort of process on the 2020 budget where we're at right now. Cabinet's also supposed to meet on Monday to continue with talking about that. According to Saad Hariri, the prime minister, he says the 2020 budget is going to be part of like a 3-year plan. So the 2020 budget is sort of like linked to the 2021 and 2022 budgets, which is something that a lot of people have called for. Like we need actual plans, right? We need longer term planning than just a year out. So this is a good sign. And Hariri also reiterated this past week that there's no new taxes in the 2020 budget. We'll see what happens with that. I think we're going to have to actually, like, in a future episode, dive in and see what exactly there is in the 2020 budget and go through the minutiae of that, because it is really important, the actual substance of that for a lot of different reasons. So after the Wednesday session of cabinet, Hariri jetted off to Saudi Arabia for a very quick trip before visiting France, where he met with Emmanuel Macron. And both these countries are really, really key for support to Lebanon. Laughing at my...
Yeah, I really like the Macron part. I'm just so proud of you.
Oui, oui, monsieur. Fromage. That's, yeah. Anyway, both France and Saudi Arabia are very, very necessary for like support to Lebanon, right? And France is because of the CEDAR, the Paris 4 conference that happened in April 2018. Hariri's trip there was supposedly it was about sort of like unlocking the $11 billion that was pledged to Lebanon back in April 2018. But I haven't seen anything yet, and we're recording this on Saturday morning, so who knows what's going to come out of all this. But so far, I have not seen anything concrete come out of this yet. France itself, in addition to organizing and hosting the conference, pledged 550 million euros. So we're waiting to see, like, when is this money going to start flowing? Maybe we'll see something later on in Hariri's trip, or, you know, hopefully in the coming weeks or coming months. That's the idea. But nothing so far, concrete at least. And then also, speaking of Saudi Arabia, we got news this week that they may actually be considering some sort of financial assistance to Lebanon. The Saudi finance minister gave an interview to Reuters this week, and he said that his country is in talks with Lebanon to provide financial assistance. He didn't give details, but reports suggest that there could be some sort of high-level ministerial meeting in October where a bunch of deals are signed, or some sort of agreement is come to. This may actually be around the Future Investment Initiative conference that is held every year in Riyadh. Mm-hmm. You may remember this conference from last year. This is where Mohammed bin Salman made this very off-color joke about like Hariri being detained. When he was on stage with Hariri, it was very cringy, and because I mean he had detained Hariri like not even a year prior to that, right? Back in November of 2017.
Allegedly, Ben.
Allegedly. And so maybe the Saudi support may come around that same time, this October conference, which Hariri is scheduled to attend. According to other reports, this is from the Central News Agency, they said that the Saudi financial support could come in a package of quick aid that Lebanon would receive in the next few weeks in the form of deposits placed at the central bank. So we don't really know what this is going to look like, or if this is even going to look like anything. In the Reuters report itself, they quote an analyst who cast doubt on all of this. You know, he said he's skeptical about all this because Saudi Arabia, like there have been rumors and talk about Saudi Arabia supporting Lebanon financially before, especially back at the beginning of this year, right after Qatar pledged $500 million. We heard this, you know, these rumors, well, maybe Saudi Arabia is also going to pledge some money, but that never really came to anything, right?
Yeah.
And honestly, I'm a little bit skeptical too. Because a lot of things have changed. You know, people talk about, you know, like 2006 when the Gulf countries, you know, gave a lot of aid to Lebanon in the aftermath of the Israeli war on Lebanon. But this time around, you know, Gulf players are in a far different position, number one, than they were back then. Their finances are really tighter and they want more bang for their buck. Some of them see Lebanon as dominated by Hezbollah, or at least that's the signals that some give off. They don't want to prop up a Hezbollah-friendly government, right?
Yeah.
So there's that. Also, the United States it seems more skeptical of Lebanon as well for the same reasons. And so there is a question as to the U.S.'s willingness and I mean honestly competence to put in the diplomatic legwork necessary to bail Lebanon out this time around, and then also just the amount of money required this time around would just be an order of magnitude larger. It seems like $5 billion. That was the amount of money that Lebanon lost in FX reserves just in 2018. Now, 2019 has been flat so far because of a lot of extraordinary measures that Riyad Salameh has done. But $5 billion would basically buy a year's time, which isn't a great investment for a lot of money, right? So you need a whole lot of money. And these people are maybe a little bit more reticent. These actors in the Gulf maybe are a little bit more reticent. The U.S. is maybe a little bit more reticent to, go this extra mile for Lebanon. So for me, it's one of those things where, I'll believe it when I see it. It's possible, let's hope that something like this comes through. But this also could just be one of those things, one of those carrots that's just there and just never really materializes. And finally, speaking of financial matters in the economy, gas stations closed Wednesday in what the owners called a preemptive strike. The issue here is a lack of dollars. So gas is imported, so that means it's paid for in dollars, but station owners sell it to the public in lira. So they have to exchange these lira for dollars to buy more gas, right? Yep. But there's a problem. There's a shortage of dollars in the country, which means that they're having a really hard time making this exchange. Banks aren't doing it as much, and some of the sarraf, some of the money exchangers are charging higher rates than the official exchange rate. And of course, this is making the gas station owners very unhappy because they can't pass this cost on to the consumer. Prices are set by the government. And so they shut down shop on Wednesday, which of course led to like massive lines. On Tuesday, people trying to get gas before everything closed up. And this is just another one of these signals that, all is not well as far as the stability of Lebanon's financial system goes, as far as the stability of the lira peg goes, and just in general, you probably shouldn't have this massive of a problem in just terms of liquidity in the country.
Yeah, and it's important to note here that fuel importers in Lebanon it's kind of an oligopoly of a few major companies. It's not a free market of any kind, so it's not like one importer would accept lira and then they can coordinate and do things as if they are a monopoly. And the monopoly in the telecom sector, the two companies that are kind of half public, half private, have also started doing the same kind of measures. They are asking their retailers to pay them or to buy the products that they buy from them in dollars. And this is a major controversy because first of all, you're a half public company. How would you not accept the official currency of the country? And then second, because the same as you were saying about the gas stations, retailers like Class gets all the money in lira from customers, right? I rarely go and pay in dollars, and then they have to go and exchange the money for high rates or whatever. So they're facing the same problem, and they even went on strike as well, I think on the same day or the day after, the gas stations. So it is a big problem, and we see how the government will be managing or intervening to avoid more of these strikes, because these strikes, the main problem with them is that apart from just causing long lines and just inconvenience, they also damage the confidence in the economy, which is the thing that we need the most at this moment in Lebanon's history. Now, the most important thing is confidence in the economy to prevent a collapse.
Yeah, and that's sort of one of the problems here is that the government doesn't really seem to be doing anything about this, and BDL also just doesn't seem to be doing anything about this. It seems as though BDL is more than happy to not have a lot of liquidity in the market right now, which is eyebrow-raising, to say the least. Okay, so that's it for the news, but this week we really want to get into something else that's been going on that really stirred up some old memories and some very hurtful memories for a lot of people regarding what happened and what went on during the Israeli occupation of South Lebanon between the 70s and 2000.
Yeah, so we talked last week about Amer Fakhoury, a former high officer in the South Lebanon Army, coming back to Lebanon weirdly without having any consideration for being arrested or whatever, because he had already been there was already an arrest warrant against him and a verdict in absentia for 15 years, and he just returns to Lebanon all of a sudden. So people know his name. He was a very notorious figure in the South Lebanon Army. He was responsible for the Khiam prison center, the detention center that we will talk about in more detail in a bit, that used to imprison a lot of Lebanese fighters and civilians from 1985 till 2000, till the liberation of the South. So there was a lot of outrage, a lot of protest against him. People were calling him the butcherer of Khayyam and saying that he should be, executed or arrested or whatever. He was arrested and he's now under trial. And also apparently another army officer, high-ranking officer, apparently Brigadier General, has been arrested as well for facilitating his return, because there should be something that happened on a very high level in order to kind of cancel the warrant and the verdict against him in a way that allows him to come back without being, without worrying about his record. Anyway, there were some things that fueled this tension. Also that, people were circulating photos of him, of this guy, Fakhoury, with Army Chief Joseph Aoun in an event that Joseph Aoun was attending in Washington or somewhere in the States, and with Sami Jmail. But these were minor things. But the most important thing that kind of lit up the Lebanese internet was Suhab Shara entering the debate. And Suhab Shara is considered an icon of Lebanese resistance because she tried to assassinate Antoine Lahad, who was the head of the SLA, who we will talk about in a bit as well. And she's considered she's called Zahra al-Janub, the flower of the South, and she's really one of the most romanticized and appreciated resistance icons. And she took part of the debate. She accused the FPM of being like the political force that is kind of driving the orientation towards the direction towards normalizing things with normalizing relations with Israel, by using these debates, as an opportunity to rethink the history of who is a traitor or a collaborator or not, because the SLA was basically an Israeli proxy militia in Lebanon. We thought actually it would be a good idea to just dive into the history and tell what the SLA was about. It's not very famous, how it started, etc., and specifically what they did, the horrible things they did, and why it's it's an issue that is very sensitive to a lot of people.
Yeah, this is one of those things in Lebanese history that runs deep. Like a lot of things, from the Civil War and after the Civil War.
Yeah, especially that a lot of people escaped with the Israeli army during the withdrawal in 2000, and we will talk about that in the discussion. But this is the main issue. There's a lot to be resolved, not only in terms of people's memories, but also in terms of what we do about Lebanese people who escaped, SLA people and families and other civilians who escaped with the Israelis back in 2000.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the SLA. It started in June 1976, with a defection from the Lebanese army by Major Saad Haddad. So it was basically Haddad who was the main figure, not Lahad in the beginning. And he announced the creation of the Army of Free Lebanon. It was only called the SLA in the mid-80s after Lahad took over. Haddad was a major in the army. He was born in Marja'yun in the south, and this is where he was based. And he was the head of a 400-troop army unit based in Qlai'a on the southern Lebanese border. And he claimed that when he announced, his Army of Free Lebanon, what he was doing was to stop the expansion of Palestinian guerrillas who were fighting Israel from South Lebanon, which was a reality that we talked about in many episodes, actually, that relate to the Civil War, which was a reality that came to be after the Palestinian Liberation Organization was kicked out of Jordan. So it moved its main base of operations against Israel to South Lebanon. So to give some context, it was the second year of the Civil War and a time of important defections. There was a big defection before that of Haddad on the other side of the spectrum. So Haddad was a Christian figure, a Christian right-wing figure, pro-Israel, etc. But there was a defection of Ahmad al-Khatib, a colonel who had led a majority Muslim kind of bunch of troops. At their peak, they reached something like 2,000, I think, into forming the Lebanese Arab Army, a faction of the Lebanese army that joined the fight alongside the Lebanese national movement, so the left kind of, and the Muslims and the Palestinian forces, and supported a coup d'etat against the president Salim Ayyash, etc. They dissolved in 1977 when the Syrians kind of kidnap their leaders. But whatever, it was a time of defections. It was the time of a breakdown of the Lebanese state. So back to Haddad's rebel army. Israel needed a strong ally for its operation, because it knew that Lebanon was a new battlefield with the PLO coming here. It supported the creation of the SLA. It was a coordinated effort, clearly. And despite the defection from the army, Haddad remained unofficially an army officer until a few years later, when he announced his independent state. We'll get to that. So Haddad's forces fought against the Palestinian factions and its allies during the first couple of years. It was like the second and third year of the Lebanese civil war. And during that time, Israel had been targeting PLO sites for a while. But the turning point was when Israel invaded Lebanon in the Operation Litani in 1978. It invaded South Lebanon up to the Litani River with the aim of clearing the area from PLO fighters. This was the area that is, if you are based in this area, you could reach Israel. So this is basically the most important part for Israel to be securing. And they also wanted to help Haddad's forces kind of take control over this area. There was a ceasefire agreement with the PLO, and there was a UN Security Council resolution 425 that established UNIFIL. So Israel left most of its sites after the ceasefire, and they left them to Haddad's forces rather than, to some official Lebanese authority. And after the operation in 1978, a new actor, UNIFIL, was, emerged in South Lebanon. So Haddad also had to kind of navigate their presence and assume his power over the geography. And there was actually a very sour beginning for the relationship when he shelled the headquarters of UNIFIL and killed 8 soldiers. And at many instances after that, there were some tensions with UNIFIL. In 1979, Haddad announced a state that was never recognized by anyone, called the Free Lebanon State, as an independent kind of thing. He was dismissed from the army after that. And what he did, basically what he was trying to do, was say, we are not only a militia or an army defection initiative, we are a government, we're a provisional government of the sort. And
I mean, on the ground, weren't they they had control of the territory, they were functioning as a government, right?
Yeah. Obviously, I mean, collecting taxes from people, forced taxes from people,
right?
From ports, any ports that were used under their range, for example, they would have a tax on them. So, for example, if you're importing through a port that they can potentially bomb from their bases, you would have to pay them taxes, and taxes to the militia that's running the port, and taxes to the other militia that's half running the port. It was this kind of system. But what allowed them to actually do this, to say, okay, we have a state now, was an Israeli policy that had basically an open border policy, where Israel allowed SLA people to cross the border, use the Israeli market, export goods from the Haifa port, seaport, etc. And this was kind of the economic and geographical kind of justification, kind of the enabling factor for this to happen. But yeah, I mean, beyond that, it's not clear whether Haddad really believed he was starting a state or not. It was like a mini extension of Israel and Lebanon, ruled by a purely Maronite militia. So not a great, long-term vision, I'd say. After the Israeli invasion, Israel obviously invaded Lebanon again in 1982. The major invasion that reached much more than the previous one. And the PLO was basically pushed out of Lebanon. Bashir Ismail was elected president and then assassinated. And then and then there was the Sabra and Shatila massacre in the Palestinian camps in Beirut. And Haddad's forces, according to many historical records and eyewitnesses, took part in the Sabra and Shatila massacre as well. Which you would think is weird because, there's supposed to be a South Lebanon thing. What the hell did they have to do with things happening in Beirut? But no, they were just like basically doing some of the dirty work for the Israelis, because the massacre, everyone knows, it was not by Israeli soldiers, but it was under the kind of the supervision and the blessing of Israel, and under actually literally the lights of the flares of Israeli soldiers. So
right.
So it was a proxy for Israel doing like the things that the Israeli army could not do directly. In 1984, Haddad died due to cancer, and his Free Lebanon State was kind of transformed into the SLA. And Antoine Lahad took over. And this is why the SLA is known as Jaish Lahad, after Lahad himself. And he's the one who is most remembered rather than Haddad. And from 1985 onwards, the SLA controlled the administration and the South Lebanon security belt that was established by Israel. It's basically the Israeli occupied part of Lebanon that remained occupied until 2000. It was almost 10% of the Lebanese territory. It was around 385 square miles. In 1988, there was an important event that happened. Suhab Shara, which we talked about a while ago, she was 21-year-old back then. She was part of the Lebanese Communist Party.
Which the Communist Party has like deep roots in the South as well, it should be noted.
Yeah, and it was part of the Lebanese, the Jamul, the resistance movement that contained many parties and factions against the Israelis that was different from, Hezbollah and Amal. So Suha was 21-year-old back then. She was part of the Lebanese Communist Party, and she was disguised as an aerobics teacher to infiltrate the family of Lahad.
Like a step up, step down.
Yeah, maybe that, or gymnastics,
jacks.
But it's wrongly translated. I don't know. It's just some sports teacher.
All right.
And then she infiltrated the family this way. And then one of the evenings, she was at the dinner table, and Lahad arrives, and she shot him twice, once in the chest and once in the shoulder. But Lahad survived. He didn't die. And actually, she was jailed, obviously, for 10 years in the Khiam detention center that we mentioned and we will talk about now. And later on, after 10 years, she was released through a prisoner exchange deal. And then she wrote her biography, La Résistance, in French, and it's available in other languages, I think, about the time in jail, etc., if people want to read it. But this is how Suhab Shara became kind of the icon through this one operation, because it's not like doing an operation against a vehicle, an army vehicle or whatever. It was like
right,
long planned and very personal, etc. So I was saying, during the 15 years from 85 till 2000, till the liberation, the SLA was tasked by the Israelis to create and manage Khiam prison camp, the detention center. And this is the thing that the SLA is most remembered for in the minds of the Lebanese. And the Khiam detention center was previously a French barracks. It was turned into a detention center by the SLA in 1985. And
so it's in the town of Khayyam, which is in Nabatea, down in the south.
Yeah, it's near Marjayun, but in the Nabatea geographically. So this was the detention center where most resistance fighters and also civilians who disobeyed the SLA or Israel were taken to. And it was mostly known for the torture that happened there rather than the imprisonment simply.
So it wasn't just people who were taken in by the SLA that went to this SLA controlled facility. Also, Israel brought prisoners there and handed them over to the SLA.
I mean, we don't know exactly how they coordinated this, or I don't know, but it was the main detention center for anyone involved in anti-Israel or anti-SLA activities.
Okay.
In the south. So yeah, the answer is yes, I think. Obviously, no one had any charges or trials or any judicial procedures. It was all detention without any procedures. And Amnesty International, among other organizations, have described the actions by the SLA in Khiam as crimes of war crimes. And just quickly, some of the details of how horrible the situation was, things that we know from the letter of Amnesty International on the day after the liberation, from Robert Fisk's reporting for Independent and other sources. We will put them in the description of the episode. So the most important job of this detention center was to get information out of resistance fighters and people close to the resistance movement, be it the Hezbollah's resistance or the Lebanese resistance, whatever. And it was heavily based on extreme interrogation. The SLA men used to cover prisoners' head with filthy hoods, take off their clothes, tie them to whipping poles through electricity wires, and douse them with water depending on the weather. If it's winter, with cold water, if it's summer, with very hot water, and giving them electric shocks in their chests and genitals as part of the interrogation, suspending and whipping them using electricity wires. It's basically insane. All kind of bad torture that you can think of was happening there. One prisoner told Lorient Le Jour that during the torture sessions they would operate a noisy engine in order to cover our cries of pain and to make sure that the residents living nearby would not hear. There was also something that obviously there was starvation and very bad food and minimal exposure to daylight. And something that was really insane was they had these small metallic cages that they used to put prisoners in while they were handcuffed. And these boxes were 75 centimeters tall and 75 centimeters wide. So they were literally, you look at it and you can't imagine how a human being can be in there. People would be handcuffed and put in there. And then they would beat the outside of this metallic box for hours as part of the mental torture. Yeah, and this is all like by SLA people. And who was supervising all of this? Fakhoury, the butcherer of Khiam. And this is why people, they have so much hatred towards him, and so it's such an emotionally charged thing.
Do we have any idea how many people went through this prison during the time?
Yeah, it was 5,000 people who went through it, but a lot of them were released based on exchange and other deals, etc. At the end of it, it was only 144 people who were left, but overall it hosted around 5,000 people.
I mean, 5,000, that's a lot of people for a small country like Lebanon. And so you actually have, this is sort of woven into a lot of families' fabrics here in Lebanon. People actually know people who are in their family or related to people who were tortured at Khiam, or they know people, maybe their neighbor or a friend of the family was tortured at Khiam. So this is something that is recent. It's in, living memory, and something that's very obviously, deep and deeply hurtful, that touches a broad swath of the Lebanese public.
Definitely. And Fakhoury's role in it specifically was important. Former inmates have reported how he was supervising the torture sessions, etc., and have reported he was responsible for the death of at least 2 people who were killed when they suppressed the rebellion that was happening in the Khayyam prison by throwing gas canisters into the cells. So 2 people suffocated to death. The cells were already horrible and barely had any kind of ability to breathe. This is how horrible the situation was. And the Israelis have always repeatedly claimed that they were not involved in the management of it or the practices that happening inside, or they were kind of distancing themselves from the SLA, saying it's not our responsibility. But actually
ridiculous.
We know this. Yeah, it's ridiculous. Politically, we know that's ridiculous, but also actually factually that's completely wrong. Because first of all, Israel was the only sponsor of the SLA. All the resources and training, etc., came from Israel. The detainees used to be taken to Israel and back to Khiam for interrogation. So there was very close coordination about who is detained and why. Prison exchanges that we talked about involved kidnapped Israeli soldiers, not SLA members mostly. So it was actually Israel was kind of the one who was deciding the fate of these prisoners.
And for all intents and purposes, Khiam was a part of the Israeli security apparatus at the time.
Definitely. And most importantly, a high court case in Israel brought by human rights lawyers pushed the Israeli Defense Ministry to admit that Israel used to pay all the staff of the Khiam prison, train the interrogators and guards, and provide assistance with lie detector tests. So SLA's management was only kind of a franchise for the Israeli brand of detention and torture. And most symbolically, Israel in its war on Lebanon in 2006, it destroyed the prison. Although it was a museum by then, it was just a place that people could go and see the horrors that we were talking about and be told about them. And Israel destroyed it, kind of erasing the built history of the war crimes. So it tells you a lot about, whether they are actually connected to it or not. And I advertise listeners to watch this very super emotional but nice video about Lebanese residents rushing to the Khiam prison the moment of the liberation and breaking open the doors with their bare hands and the tools that they found. And first of all, the prisoners didn't know that this was happening. They had no idea that there was liberation. Absolutely no idea. So one of them said that they thought they were there to massacre them. And second, the Lahad's people were still on the way. They were meeting some of them on their way, but they didn't care. They were rushing to the prison to see if their loved ones were still inside. It's such an emotional thing. We will add the link to the description. It's a nice video to watch, I think. But anyway, the end of all of this came in 2000 with the collapse of the South Lebanon Army, which happened literally the moment that the Israelis started withdrawing from Lebanon. It was a very sudden, immediate thing. At first there were some low-rank defections, but it then happened just on the day of the withdrawal of the last troops withdrawing. There was no SLA at all. Lahad actually wanted to stay, and he thought he could stay, and he asked Israel for the support. But Ehud Barak had won the election in Israel based on the promise of withdrawing from Lebanon. He didn't want to continue the war, I think, through this proxy that is the SLA. Right. It was a headache for Israel, And it was cheaper actually to allow them to come into Israel rather than to keep them in Lebanon, because they were paying them money to be doing this and a lot of resources to be doing this job. So in a lot of ways, actually coming in as like refugees and having to, deal with their own shit personally, individually as families, was a cheaper option. So this is what happened. Lahad and most of his people just escaped Lebanon to Israel. It's estimated to be around 3,000 people.
You're talking about soldiers and their families?
And their families, yeah. And also reportedly a lot of residents who were kind of okay with the SLA, cooperating with it, because people lived under its rule for a long time. So of course a lot of people would have connections, etc., and they escaped as well. And then Lahad died in 2015. There was an attempt to bring him to be buried in Lebanon. People protested and it didn't happen, so he was buried in France, I think, where he spent his last days. But that's it for the SLA. This is how it started and ended. Kind of the most notorious militia in Lebanese history. There's really very few people who defend the SLA. It's not like other Lebanese militias that we've talked about. People have a lot of emotional connection to. This one is quite, khalas, rejected as kind of crossing all lines.
Yeah, but at the same time, this is a story that has not ended yet. You talked about just like the Hariri of the 2000 withdrawal and the fleeing of the SLA down south across the border. But this created a new question of, well, what do we do with these people? These people are Lebanese. They are Lebanese at the end of the day, but they are now in Israel. Do they stay there? Do they go somewhere else? Do they come back perhaps? Do they have a right to come back? If they do come back, what are the terms of that? Do they need to, face some sort of prosecution or, pay some sort of penalty? And this is a really big question, and this is also a question that is very unfortunately infused with sectarianism, right? Because even though, like you say, a lot of people don't really defend the SLA, nobody says what happened at Khiam was right, or good. At the same time, you have this, largely Maronite force that was there that did all of this. And so all of a sudden, if just because they did all of this stuff, does that make them non-Lebanese? Does that make them non-Christian? Can you turn your backs on them completely because of this? Or do they have some sort of, claim? Do they have some sort of right to come back, especially given the sectarian dynamics of the country?
Yeah, I mean, you're touching exactly on the most sensitive point about this whole story. And this is what is most politicized. There are some sides that have clear stances on it, but everyone is there's politicization that is very sectarian based, related to the fact that they're Christians and Maronites specifically. On many occasions, this was kind of surfaced, especially when Bashar al-Ra'i, the Maronite patriarch, visited Israeli territories back in 2014 as part of his trip accompanying the Pope. And he was talking to former SLA people and their families, and he was saying that he completely rejects their labeling as traitors. He kind of took their sides 100%, and he called for their return to Lebanon. Christian political forces in general have been very supportive and kind of eager for the return of this population, mainly because it's Maronite Christian. Kataib have submitted a draft bill for pardoning all of these people. Basile has talked about them as forcefully exiled many times. So there is a push indirectly for kind of pardoning people or reducing to a very bare minimum the sentences to former SLA fighters, etc.
And I mean, I think there's also a good reason for this as well. Apart from the idiotic political calculations that you might make about this, some kid who fled with his family, he's still Lebanese, his ancestral village, does he just no longer have any sort of right to go back to his ancestral village? That seems really, really harsh to me.
And no one really wants that, because the law, the Lebanese parliament has passed a law that basically stated very clearly that SLA fighters would be arrested but will have a fair trial, and people who were not involved in the military operations or security operations and family members of SLA fighters can come back to Lebanon. Will just have to register the names with the Lebanese army, obviously to be monitored, whatever, but will not be like detained or arrested or anything. This law has been passed. It's yet to be implemented, I think, because it says that the government has to issue decrees for the kind of the implementation decrees, and this hasn't been done yet. I think there was talks about it earlier this year. I don't know if it's done or not, but in any way we haven't seen any significant return of this population yet. But the main division is still related to whether we call them exiled or we call them escapees or whatever. This is like whether they had agency or they were forced to do this. And I completely agree with what you said in terms of like children who escaped there, but also taking it to the more controversial level. I would say that a lot of the people who were recruited by the SLA are just similar to people who were recruited by other militias in terms of having financial dependency or the need for some financial support. The SLA used to pay through Israel, used to pay $500 for each member. This is a lot of money in the 80s and the 90s.
Oh, yeah, wow.
It's more than the minimum wage today in Lebanon. So you can imagine. People were...
I mean, that says a lot about a lot of different things. But yeah.
Exactly. People were living under its rule, so they had to deal with this entity, and they might as well, get recruited if they don't find any other jobs. This economic situation back then in the area was horrible. So there was kind of, from a class-based perspective, I kind of also think that it should not be like, everyone who's recruited by the SLA should be treated as, a first-tier kind of traitor. But obviously, this came at the cost of displacing more than 200,000 people from South Lebanon over this period of time, the killing and the torture of so many people. So people who gave the orders have to be held accountable and have to be tried. It's just, it's a no-brainer. No one should be discussing this at all. It's just about how we deal with the mass of the population, the families, and the people who were kind of half associated, etc., with the SLA.
And I imagine, if you are one of these, families that left with the SLA down to Palestine in 2000, then there are other considerations as well, just as far as, okay, maybe, you're innocent or whatever, but if I were in their position, I think I would be a little bit afraid. Let's say there were implementing decrees and everything, and you could like fly into Beirut airport, no problem. Like once you get there, once you touch down, you're going to be seen as your SLA perhaps unfairly blamed for some of the torture that happened at Khiam. There could be certain extrajudicial consequences for you and your family.
Societal.
That may not, and maybe not to the degree of, like somebody going out and carrying out vigilante justice, but, just like smaller things where, where people don't treat you as a full member of society, that maybe don't make you really want to return.
Yeah. I mean, this, in my personal opinion, even if they fully allow the return, it will not happen, or it will happen in a very limited extent, because of what you're saying. I think this is the most important thing that people think of, their sense of societal security. So it will be a big barrier. But in terms of official and like political and like Hezbollah, no, the policy is very clear. From the moment of the liberation, actually, not even one SLA fighter who turned himself in was killed. Hezbollah submitted all of them, turned all of them into the Lebanese authorities. There's no one who says that they want to kill them if they return or anything. Hezbollah also has this as part of the memorandum of understanding with FPM about this idea that they want these Lebanese people to come back within, without, dismissing the records of the criminals or whatever. But still, there was this there is this consensus politically and to an extent maybe socially that it's not all of them in the same category. But people like Fakhoury, well, no, really. I mean, I don't know what he was thinking, but I think what he's getting now is, and what he will get, I hope he gets a good sentence, because no, these people who had command, they are responsible, and for historical justice, they should be held accountable.
Yeah, I mean, it's been suggested, and I think it makes a lot of sense that Fakhoury must have received some sort of assurances that he would not be arrested, right, flying into Beirut airport. I think it's very important to get to the bottom of that and figure out, well, who made these who made these assurances to him. Well, why did he feel like he could just not face the consequences of his actions. You know?
Exactly. I hope we know more about that in the future.
All right. Well, I guess we'll just have to wait and see what happens with this. But thanks so much for doing all that research. I learned a whole lot this episode, Nizar.
I'm glad.
And we're going to be back next week with another episode. Until then, I'm Benjamin Red.
I'm Nizar Hassan.
And this has been the Lebanese Politics Podcast.
Politics Podcast is brought to you by myself, Nizar Hassan, Benjamin Red, produced behind the scenes by Susan Wilson, and the music is by